Stop scrolling right now, because what I'm about to tell you ISN is just another collection of spooky stories. These are 10 documented incidents from Manitoba. It's winter roads, a frozen wilderness so hostile that people vanish without explanation, where rescue teams find evidence they can never rationalize, and where the official reports always say, driver error, even when the physics don't add up. Here is what terrifies me most. 4 of the people in these stories are still missing. Their vehicles were found, their belongings were intact, but they simply ceased to exist somewhere between 2 towns on roads that thousands drive every year. But here is my promise, and this is why you need to watch until the very end. At the conclusion of this video, I'll reveal the one survival pattern that connects all 10 incidents. The detail that could save your life if you ever find yourself on a winter road at the wrong hour. This isn't in any official manual. It is something I discovered by analyzing these cases, and it's the reason one Manitoba trucker refused to ever speak about it again. Before we descend into the frozen darkness, do these 3 things right now. First, subscribe to Vesper Shroud immediately. Next week, I'm releasing the cases that were too disturbing for this compilation. Stories about entire convoys that went silent. Stories about highways where the same stretch claims vehicles every 13 years like clockwork. Subscribers get 48-hour early access. Second, SMASH that notification bell. I upload every single week, and you don't want to miss what is coming. We redocumenting the darkest phenomena the northern roads have to offer. Third, drop a comment. Tell me, where are you watching from, and have you ever experienced something unexplainable on an isolated road? Your story might hold the key to understanding what is hunting on Manitoba as highways. One final warning: if you've ever driven through Manitoba in winter, if you've ever seen something on the shoulder that didn't quite look right, if you've ever felt that primal certainty that you were being watched from the darkness beyond your headlights, you might recognize these locations. And you might finally understand why the old truckers told you never to stop on certain stretches after midnight. Now, let me tell you about the playground where children's footprints lead into a frozen field, and why the school board forbids anyone from following them. Story 1. Frozen children. Playground prints that lead to a field. I found the prints on a Tuesday morning in January, and I wish to God I had never looked down. My name is Sarah, and I work as a park maintenance supervisor for the town of Carleton, Manitoba, a small prairie community where everyone knows everyone and nothing scary is supposed to happen. We have a population of about 4,000 people, the kind of place where winter is a normal fact of life, where children play outside even when it is brutally cold, and where unusual things are usually explained away by rational causes. That morning, I had come to the playground to check on the equipment after a heavy snowfall the night before, to make sure everything was safe for the children who would arrive after school. The prints were impossibly small. They started at the northwest corner of the playground, right where the fence line met the open field beyond. The field was a frozen expanse of white that stretched for miles, bordered only by distant tree lines and the eerie, endless sky of the Manitoba prairie. These were boot prints, definitely, but they belonged to a child, maybe 5 or 6 years old, and they went in only one direction, into the field, away from the school, away from the playground, away from anything warm or safe or civilized. The creepy sensation started immediately. Something about the prints was deeply wrong. There were at least a dozen of them, maybe more, all small, all walking in a straight line as if guided by something invisible. But what terrified me most was the orderliness of them. They didn't wander or skip or deviate. They marched into that frozen field with the precision of soldiers, with the inevitability of something following an unquestionable command. I followed them. I know that sounds like the kind of decision someone makes in a horror story right before everything falls apart, and I am aware of how stupid it was. But I was alone, and the prints were fresh, and the disturbing thought had already crystallized in my mind that something was very wrong. A child had come out here, had walked into a field that in January is nothing but white death, and I needed to know why. The prints led me deeper. The playground fell behind, first looking small, then disappearing entirely. The field stretched endlessly. The wind had picked up, and it was screaming across the white expanse in a way that made it hard to hear anything else. My breath came out in clouds that froze almost instantly in the -20-degree air. My eyes began to water from the cold, and I had to wipe them constantly to keep seeing where I was going. That is when I noticed something that made my blood turn to ice. The prints were getting smaller, not the footprints themselves, but the distance between them. The child who had made these tracks was walking slower and slower, or stopping more and more frequently, as if becoming exhausted or afraid or something else. Something I couldn't quite articulate. And there were more prints now. More sets of them, intersecting the original line, all heading in the same direction. Multiple children, all walking into the frozen darkness, all leaving the relative safety of the school playground behind. I should have turned back. Everything in my survival instincts was screaming at me to stop, to go back, to report what I found to the school. But I was caught in that eerie compulsion that comes when you are trying to solve a mystery. That terrifying need to understand what is happening even when understanding it might destroy you. After what felt like half a mile but was probably less, I came to something that made me stop dead in my tracks. There was a clearing, a perfect circle in the snow where the white had been compressed down to ice, revealing the dark frozen ground beneath. At the center of the circle, the prints all stopped. Just stopped, as if the children had been lifted away, or dissolved, or ceased to exist entirely. I stood at the edge of that circle for a long time. Minutes, maybe longer. The wind howled, the cold pressed down, and I felt it then, the horrifying sensation of being watched by something that was very close and very interested in my presence. The shadow moved across the snow behind me, but when I spun around, there was nothing there except the endless field and my own tracks leading back toward the school. The unsettling certainty flooded through me that something had just been standing where I was standing, and had moved out of my line of sight deliberately to keep me from seeing it clearly. I ran. I don't remember running back to the playground, but I must have because that is where they found me an hour later, sitting in my car with the heat blasting, my hands shaking so badly I couldn't grip anything. The school called the police. The police called the RCMP. And by that afternoon, Carleton was filled with official vehicles and concerned adults trying to understand what was happening. The school bus log was checked immediately. This was the first thing the authorities looked at because it seemed like the most logical starting point. If children had left the school grounds, there would be a record. The bus had picked up and dropped off right on schedule. Every child who was supposed to arrive had arrived. Every child who was supposed to leave had left. There were no missing children. No one had been reported absent. Everything in the official record said nothing was wrong. But the prints were real. Everyone could see them. I walked the police officers out to the playground, and we photographed the prints in detail. The eerie nature of them was undeniable. Small boots, arranged in perfect lines, all heading into the field, all stopping at that same impossible circle. The police organized a search. 20 officers, search dogs, volunteers from the town, all heading into that frozen field with thermal equipment and rescue gear. They found nothing, no sign of children, no clothes, no bodies. The search dogs became agitated as they approached the circle, refusing to go closer, their handlers struggling to control them. The dogs knew something was wrong, something that triggered their fear responses in a way that nothing else in that field did. The search was called off by late afternoon. The official report, filed with the provincial office the next day, noted the following: January 15, 2024, 14:30 hours. Report of unusual prints at Carleton School playground. Preliminary investigation found approximately 15 small boot prints leading from the playground into the adjacent field. School bus logs and attendance records show no missing children. All students accounted for. Search of the field revealed no evidence of foul play or missing persons. Search dogs refused to enter a specific area of the field. Prints appear consistent with common child-sized footwear. Likely explanation: prints from previous days, additional snow coverage creating impression of single event. No current danger to community. No follow-up investigation required, but that explanation didn't work for me. The prints were fresh. The snow had fallen only the night before, and I knew what I felt in that field. The unsettling presence. The terrifying certainty that something was there, something was watching, something was waiting. I did my own research. I contacted the school, talked to the teachers, tried to figure out which children might have been outside that morning. I got nothing but polite refusals and redirects to the school administration. No one wanted to acknowledge the weirdness of it. Everyone seemed to be operating under the implicit agreement that we were going to pretend this hadn't happened, that everything was normal, that the explanation in the official report was sufficient. But then I found the ledger. I was doing some cleaning in the school, this maintenance office, when I discovered it, buried in a filing cabinet under old supply orders. It was a printed book, the kind schools used to keep, and it was titled Attendance and Incident Log. I shouldn't have looked at it. It wasn't my business, and I knew that. But the horrifying compulsion that had driven me into that field drove me to open it. The entries were from the previous winter, December through March of the year before, and scattered through those months, recorded in neat handwriting, were entries like this. December 2nd, 5 students absent. No phone calls, no notification from parents. Students reappeared in class the next morning, claiming to have been in attendance. Parents confirmed they were homesick but have no memory of calling the school. Students appear confused about the missing time. December 19th, 8 students reported seeing children in white during recess. Children described them as friends, but no other student recognized the descriptions. Teachers investigated but found nothing. Decided not to alarm parents. January 7th, 12 students absent. Returned the next day. Several parents reported strange dreams about their children calling them from somewhere cold and dark. Children have no memory of being absent. January 14th, significant snowfall. Ground crew supervisor reported finding prints at playground leading into field. Investigation inconclusive. RCMP consulted but found no evidence of criminal activity. And then, the most chilling entry of all, dated January 15th, the morning I found the prints. At least 15 students reported seeing children in the snow during morning recess, standing beyond the playground fence. When questioned, students became distressed and refused to discuss what they seen. Several students had small rashes on their wrists, circular marks approximately 1 inch in diameter, consistent with frostbite but appearing overnight. Investigation ongoing but no missing children reported. Recommend extreme caution on field trips. No communication with parents at this time. Those circular marks, those rashes, marks that appeared overnight, marks that looked like something had gripped those children's wrists, something intensely cold, something that was trying to pull them away. I showed the ledger to the school principal. Her face went completely pale. She told me the book should not exist, that these entries should never have been made, that the previous maintenance supervisor who had created it had left town quite suddenly in March and never returned. She took the ledger from me and said it would be handled appropriately. It was never mentioned again, but I started paying attention to the children when I was around them. I noticed that some of them had those circular marks on their wrists. Not many, maybe 1 in every 15 or 20 children. And I noticed that when I asked about them, the children either didn't they had them or refused to talk about them, their faces going distant and strange, as if they were remembering something they'd been told never to discuss. More disturbing was the realization that began to crystallize in my mind over the following weeks. The prints in the field hadn't been made by living children. They had been made by children who existed somewhere else, somewhere between the playground and the darkness. And whatever force had drawn them out there, whatever presence lived in that frozen field, was still trying to pull children away, still making them forget where they went, still marking them with those terrifying circles of ice-burned flesh. The RCMP never filed a follow-up report. The incident was closed within a week. Life in Carleton returned to normal, the way it always does in small towns when something unsettling happens, through the simple process of deciding not to acknowledge it anymore. But I think about those prints every day. I think about the children who left the playground and didn't return. I think about the marks on the wrists of the living children, evidence that something had touched them, had called to them, had nearly pulled them away into the darkness. And I know, with absolute certainty, that whatever is in that field, whatever made those prints and caused those marks, is still there. It's still watching. It's still trying. And on the coldest nights, when the wind screams across the frozen prairie and the darkness is complete, I can almost hear the sound of small boots walking across ice, heading toward something unseen, toward something that wears a familiar shape and speaks in a voice that sounds almost like a friend calling from somewhere very far away and very, very cold. The field is still there. The playground is still used by children every day. And somewhere in between, in the space where reality seems thin and negotiable, something is still collecting them, still marking them, still waiting for the one child who won to find their way back. The official report says everything is fine, but I know what I found in that field. I know what the ledger said. And I know that the most terrifying thing about horror is when no one will admit it is happening, when institutions and authority figures agree to pretend that the darkness doesn't exist. But the darkness exists. It lives in the frozen fields of Manitoba, and it has learned to hunt children. Story 2. Snowplow that kept returning to the same dead end. The snowplow came back 3 times after the road was closed. That is the detail that nobody can explain. That is the nightmare that started this whole thing. A municipal snowplow, the kind you see at 3 in the morning clearing highways so the rest of us can drive safely, kept returning to a road that had been permanently closed to traffic. Over and over, it would appear in the darkness, clearing snow that had just fallen, then disappear into the night like it had never been there at all. My name is Craig. I am a highway maintenance supervisor for the province of Manitoba, and I've been managing winter road operations for 15 years. I've seen accidents, breakdowns, and all manner of winter driving disasters. But nothing prepared me for what happened with Highway 47 North, outside of a town called Blackrock, during the winter of 2022. Highway 47 North is a dead-end road. It heads north from the main highway for about 30 kilometers, passing through sparse forest and eventually reaching an old mining area that was abandoned in the 1970s. The road itself is barely maintained anymore. We only plow it because the property owners in the area requested the service and because there is a remote weather station up there that the university operates. Normally, we send a plow out there once a week during winter, usually during daytime hours. It is not a critical route. Most people avoid it. In December of 2022, I received a report from a driver who had been heading north on Highway 47 at around 3 in the morning. They said they encountered a municipal snowplow actively clearing the road, moving at a steady pace, pushing fresh snow to the sides. The driver passed the plow, continued north, and about 5 kilometers later, realized they made a wrong turn. They turned around and came back, expecting to encounter the snowplow again since it had been behind them. But the road behind them was clear, completely clear. No snowplow anywhere, no signs of a plow having passed through recently. Just empty highway stretching back toward the main road. The driver called me immediately. They were confused and understandably unsettled. I checked our maintenance schedule. No snowplow had been assigned to Highway 47 that night. All our equipment was either in the garage or out on the main highways, clearing the priority routes. This particular plow shouldn't have been operating at all. I called the driver back and asked for a description. They said it was a standard municipal plow, the kind we use. Yellow cab, orange light bar on top. The usual configuration. But when I asked if they'd seen the operator, if they could remember anything about the person inside, they hesitated. They said they hadn't actually seen anyone in the cab. The windshield had been too dark, too reflective, or the angle had been wrong. But they were certain it was a plow actively clearing snow. I made a note of the incident and didn't think much about it. False alarms happen. People see things in the dark and make mistaken identifications. I figured it was probably an older model plow from a private contractor, maybe clearing a private road nearby that runs parallel to 47. But then it happened again. 2 nights later, another driver reported seeing a snowplow on Highway 47 North at 3:05 in the morning. Same description, yellow cab, orange light bar, moving at a steady pace, clearing snow. But when I checked our logs, no equipment had been assigned to that road. And when I called the other maintenance depots to see if anyone else had equipment in the area, nobody admitted to having a plow up there. The creepy part was that these sightings were starting to happen on a predictable schedule. Always around 3 in the morning. Always on Highway 47 North. Always when there was no official reason for a snowplow to be operating there. I decided to investigate in person. I drove out to Highway 47 on a night when we weren't scheduled to plow, and I waited about 1 kilometer from the dead-end intersection. It was about 2:30 in the morning. The temperature was -20, and the wind was pushing the newly fallen snow into drifts. My truck idled in the darkness, and I watched the road ahead, waiting to see if this mysterious plow would appear. At 3 o'clock exactly, I saw headlights approaching from the north. The snowplow emerged from the darkness like something summoned by the hour itself. It was definitely one of our vehicles. I could see the specific design of our light bar, the particular configuration of the plow blade. But something about the way it moved was wrong. The pacing was too mechanical, too perfectly consistent. A real operator would make small corrections, would vary their speed slightly depending on snow depth and road conditions. This plow moved like it was following a preset path, like it was a machine executing a program rather than a person responding to conditions. As the plow passed me, I tried to see into the cab. I looked through the windshield, trying to spot the operator, but just like the other drivers had reported, I couldn't see anyone inside. The cab appeared completely empty, just the steering wheel turning slightly, the plow blade scraping the pavement, the engine rumbling through the night, but no human presence anywhere visible. The plow continued south on Highway 47, heading back toward the main road. I immediately started my truck and followed it. I wanted to catch up with whoever was operating this vehicle and demand some explanations. But despite maintaining a steady speed of 60 kilometers per hour, I couldn't close the distance. The plow stayed about 200 meters ahead of me, maintaining a perfect, unsettling consistency. We reached the main highway. The plow made a turn and headed north again, back toward the dead-end road. I followed, and we repeated the same route, back north on Highway 47, back into the darkness and the wind and the isolated stretches of forest where nobody lived and nobody went unless they had a specific reason. This time, the plow continued all the way to the very end of the road. It pulled into the abandoned mining area, where the pavement deteriorated into gravel and then into dirt. I kept my distance, watching from about 50 meters away as the plow came to a complete stop in front of what looked like an old mining facility, a collection of deteriorating buildings and rusted equipment. The plow's engine shut off. For several minutes, nothing happened. The plow just sat there in the darkness, its lights off, a yellow shape barely visible in the starlight. I was terrified to approach it. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to turn around, to leave this place, to not investigate any further. But I am a supervisor. It's my job to manage equipment and operations. I forced myself to overcome the fear and walk toward the plow. The cab was empty, completely empty. No operator, no personal items, no sign that anyone had ever been inside. But the engine block was still warm when I placed my gloved hand on it. The plow had been running until just a few moments ago, yet I watched it the entire time and no one had gotten out. That's when I noticed the scorch marks. They covered the side of the plow in dark, charred patterns. Not rust, not normal weathering, but fresh burn marks, like something extremely hot had pressed against the metal very recently. The marks extended from the ground up to about waist height, and they formed a specific pattern. A shape, almost like something had been pressed against the side of the vehicle, leaving an imprint of itself in scorched metal and paint. The unsettling realization that struck me was that the marks looked almost human-shaped. Almost like a person had been pressed against the side of the plow with enough heat and pressure to leave a permanent impression. I backed away slowly. I didn't run, but I moved quickly to my truck, and I drove away from that mining facility at speeds that were reckless on the icy road. I didn't stop driving until I was back at the main maintenance depot, where the lights and the presence of other vehicles made me feel like I was back in the normal world. I didn't report what I seen. I didn't tell anyone about the empty cab or the scorch marks. I was terrified that people would think I was losing my mind. But I started investigating quietly. I pulled the maintenance records for our snowplow fleet, looking for any equipment that had been reported as missing or damaged. I found something unsettling in the archives. A plow had gone missing in 1993. It had been assigned to clear Highway 47, a routine operation during a winter storm. The operator never returned. Neither did the plow. They found the vehicle 2 days later, abandoned at the dead-end mining facility. The cab was empty. The engine was still running despite having been operating for hours, and the side of the plow was covered in scorch marks. The operator's name was James Colvin. He had 23 years of seniority with the department. He was experienced, careful, and reliable. He simply vanished that night in 1993. The official investigation concluded that he abandoned the vehicle and walked away, possibly suffering from some kind of mental health crisis. But nobody ever found him. Nobody ever explained what happened. I found more records. In 1971, a different plow and operator had disappeared on the same road. In 1956, another incident. Going back through the archives, I found a pattern of incidents stretching back to 1942. All of them on Highway 47 North. All of them involving snowplow operators who vanished during overnight maintenance operations. All of them followed by the discovery of the abandoned plow with scorch marks on its side. The interval between incidents varied from 3 to 8 years, but the pattern was undeniable. And then I understood something terrifying. The incidents were speeding up. The last one before the 2022 sightings had been in 1993. That is a gap of 29 years. But now the plow was appearing multiple times a week. The gap was closing. The interval was compressing. I requested that Highway 47 be permanently closed. I didn't explain why to the department heads. I just said it was no longer cost-effective to maintain a road with so little traffic. I recommended that the weather station be serviced by helicopter instead of ground access. After some bureaucratic back and forth, my recommendation was accepted. Highway 47 North was officially closed to through traffic in February of 2023. But the snowplow didn't stop coming back. After the road closure, I established a monitoring system. I set up remote cameras at the junction where 47 met the main highway, and I reviewed the footage every morning. The snowplow appeared in the recordings consistently. Always at 3 in the morning. Always moving north on the closed road. Always clearing snow from a surface that should have been left undisturbed. But here is the most terrifying part. In every recording, there were scorched tracks leading away from the plow. Footprints in the snow that were burned, as if something extremely hot had been walking through the snow, leaving marks of intense heat in its wake. The tracks led into the forest, into the darkness, away from the plow and away from the road. And then, before dawn, the plow would reappear driving back south, heading toward the main highway, its cargo of snow cleared and its purpose fulfilled for another night. I documented everything. I compiled the evidence, and I reached a conclusion that terrifies me more than anything else in my career. The snowplow isn't being operated by anyone from this time. It is not a living person clearing that road. It is something else entirely, something that has been caught in a cycle of compulsive repetition for over 80 years. Something that returns to Highway 47 North night after night, following a pattern that nobody understands and nobody can stop. The scorch marks are the key to understanding what is happening. Whatever is operating that plow isn't human. It is something that generates intense heat. Something that leaves burned impressions of itself on the metal surface. Something that walks on burning feet through the snow, leaving trails of charred ground in its wake. I believe the operators who disappeared all those years didn't flee or commit suicide. I believe they were taken. I believe something at the end of that road, something in or around that abandoned mining facility, has been pulling operators into itself for nearly a century. And the plow is what it uses to get what it wants. The plow brings someone north to that dead-end location, where the operator is then claimed, absorbed, or transformed into whatever that burning entity is. And now the interval is accelerating. The plow is coming back more frequently. It is appearing multiple times a week instead of once every few years. And I have a terrifying suspicion about why. Whatever is operating that plow is getting stronger. Or it is getting closer to finishing something. Or the boundary between its world and ours is getting thinner. And if the pattern continues, if the frequency keeps increasing, eventually the plow will be appearing constantly. All day, every day, until it reaches whatever threshold it needs to cross to fully emerge into our world. I requested a transfer to a different district. I can't work on winter road operations anymore. I can't be responsible for any equipment that might end up on a highway with a dead end. I can't risk my life or anyone else just by being involved with whatever is happening up there in the darkness. But I know the truth now, and I know what is waiting on Highway 47 North. I know what happens to the snowplow operators who take that route. And I know that somewhere in a maintenance depot or a truck garage or some forgotten location, another operator is about to be assigned to clear that dead-end road. When that happens, when someone new is sent out into that darkness, they want to come back. They'll all disappear into the same mystery that consumed James Colvin and all the others before him. And the snowplow will return to the main highway, covered in fresh scorch marks. And it will wait for the next night, the next operator, the next opportunity to pull someone into the terrifying cycle that nobody understands and nobody can stop. The road is the trap. Winter is the enemy. And the snowplow that keeps returning to the same dead end is something far more hungry and far more patient than any natural disaster or winter storm could ever be. Story 3. Last stop, the abandoned service station on Route 6. My truck, its fuel gauge was reading a quarter tank when I first saw the lights. It was 4 in the morning on a brutal December night, and I'd been driving through absolute darkness for the past 6 hours, watching the prairie unfold in endless monotony ahead of my headlights. The temperature was dropping steadily, and my dashboard was showing minus 31 degrees Celsius. I was running low on fuel, and the next major truck stop was still 45 miles away, which meant I was cutting it dangerously close. That's when the service station appeared, a creepy silhouette against the starless sky, its lights blazing like a beacon in the middle of nowhere. The place was called Reston S Service Station, according to the weathered sign out front. The sign itself looked ancient, the paint peeling off in long strips, but the lights inside were unmistakably on. Bright, welcoming. Wrong. I should have kept driving. That's what my instincts were telling me. Everything about that place screamed eerie, unsettling danger. But fuel anxiety was already creeping in. That terrifying knowledge that if I didn't stop soon, I'd be stranded on the highway in the worst possible conditions. So I pulled off the road and headed toward the station. The building was larger than I expected from the road. A two-story structure with a garage section attached to the main building. The kind of place that used to be a full-service station back when people actually stopped at these things. The lights were on in every window, but I couldn't see any movement inside. No people, no activity, just lights burning in an otherwise empty building, a disturbing sight that made my skin crawl. I parked near the pumps and sat in my cab for a moment, gathering courage. The wind was screaming across the prairie, and it sounded like something alive, something angry. The temperature outside my window was dropping by the minute. I had to get fuel, had to get inside where it was warm, had to figure out why this supposedly abandoned station still had its lights on. The door to the station was unlocked. That was my first real sign that something was very wrong. An unlocked door in the middle of winter, in the middle of nowhere, on a road where travelers are few and far between. The terrifying thought occurred to me that maybe someone was inside. Maybe someone was waiting. The inside of the station was clean. That was what struck me first. Disturbingly clean. Abandoned buildings are usually dirty, filled with dust and debris and the accumulated mess of years of neglect. But this place was immaculate. The shelves were stocked with products, canned food and drinks arranged in neat rows. The floors were swept. The counter was clear except for an old cash register and a logbook. The logbook caught my attention immediately. I walked over to it slowly, my eyes adjusting to the bright fluorescent lights that buzzed overhead with an eerie hum. The logbook was open, and it was filled with entries, handwritten notes from travelers who had stopped at the station. The dates on the pages were recent. October, November, early December, all from this year. I started reading the entries, and the creepy sensation grew with each one. October 15th, 2:47 a.m. Stopped for fuel. No attendant present. Lights on but no one inside. Left without fuel. Station felt wrong. October 29th, 3:12 a.m. Fuel pumps not working. Called out but no response. Lights on inside but the door was locked from the inside. Could see movement in the back but no one answered. Disturbing. November 3rd, 1:55 a.m. Station appears operational. Lights on. But the moment I walked inside, I felt watched. Something moved behind the counter. I left immediately without fuel. This place is haunted. November 18th, 4:30 a.m. Tried pumping fuel at the external pump. The lights inside suddenly went out. All of them at once. Then they came back on. Then went out again. I drove away terrified. November 25th, 3:20 a.m. Stopped here desperate for fuel. Waited inside for 20 minutes. No one came, but I heard sounds from upstairs. Footsteps. Someone walking back and forth. When I went to the stairs to call out, the footsteps stopped. The silence was worse than the sounds. I left everything and drove. December 1st, 2:15 a.m. The lights were off when I arrived. Completely dark. But as I turned to leave, every light in the building came on at once. I drove away and filled up at the next town. The last entry was dated 2 days ago. December 10th, 4:05 a.m. It read, stopped here. Lights on. Station appears empty. Decided to look upstairs to see if there was someone in the office. The stairs went up forever. I climbed for what felt like 15 minutes even though the building is only 2 stories. At the top, there was a door. The hallway stretched in both directions into darkness. I came back down and drove away. Station is not safe. I closed the logbook with shaking hands. The unsettling certainty had crystallized in my mind that I was in a place where something was very, very wrong. I needed to get fuel and get out, but the fuel pumps outside were mechanical, unreliable, and the pump inside the station would require talking to whoever was running this place. The inside of the station connected to the garage section through a door behind the counter. I could see through the small window in that door into the garage beyond. It was dark in there, but I could make out the shape of a car, sitting in the middle of the garage, its engine hood up. An old sedan, maybe from the 1980s, covered in a fine layer of dust. That's when I heard the sound from upstairs. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, crossing the floor above my head, back and forth, back and forth. The eerie rhythm of someone walking, or something wearing a human shape, moving through the rooms above the station. The horror of the situation was becoming undeniable. Someone was here, someone was watching me. Someone had been watching everyone who came through that door with their lights on, beckoning travelers inside. I moved toward the garage door, pulling it open. The temperature dropped immediately. The garage was unheated, and the cold rushed in like a physical force. The car was still there, still waiting, and as my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I could see that the interior was filled with objects. Clothing, bags, personal items scattered across the seats and floor. The terrifying realization hit me like a physical blow. This was a collection. Someone had been collecting things from travelers. Someone was keeping these items as trophies. The footsteps upstairs stopped. The silence that followed was absolute and complete. The kind of silence that happens when something is listening intently, when a predator has become aware of your presence and is deciding what to do about it. I stood frozen in the garage, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps, trying to process what was happening. Then the lights went out. All of them. Every light in the station, in the garage, in the entire building, extinguished simultaneously, leaving me in absolute, suffocating darkness. I didn't plan. I just ran. I bolted through the station and out the front door, my heart hammering so hard I thought it would break through my ribs. The wind hit me like a physical force, the brutal cold instantly making it hard to breathe. I ran to my truck, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I floored the accelerator. The truck fishtailed on the ice as I pulled away from the station, and in my mirror, I could see the lights coming back on inside the building. One by one, window by window, the lights blazed back to life as if welcoming the next lost traveler. I drove for an hour at dangerous speeds, the highway a blur of white and darkness, my hands gripped so tightly on the wheel that my fingers went numb. When I finally pulled into a truck stop in Brandon, I was shaking so badly I could barely stand up. I reported the station to the RCMP that morning. The officer I spoke to listened to my story with increasing skepticism. He pulled up property records on his computer and showed me what he found. Reston's service station had been closed since 1997, nearly 30 years ago. The building still stood, but it was officially condemned. It had no electricity, no water, no utilities connected to it. It was illegal to enter the property. The last known owner had died in 1998, and the station had sat empty ever since. The officer's explanation for the lights was atmospheric distortion, reflection of moonlight, or tricks of my tired eyes. The logbook was written in my imagination, a product of road fatigue and psychological stress. The disturbing experience was explained away as a vivid hallucination caused by driving through the night, by the isolation, by the terror of the highway itself. But I knew what I'd seen. I drove back to Reston's service station 3 days later in daylight, determined to prove that the place was real, that the logbook existed, that the terrifying experience wasn't just in my mind. I took photos with my phone. I documented everything. The station was exactly where I remembered it, but it was utterly, completely abandoned. The windows were boarded up. The door was locked and sealed with chains. The sign was barely holding together, the letters so weathered that you could barely read them. And there was no logbook inside. No evidence of anyone having been there in decades. I still have the photos. I still have the memory of those entries written in the logbook. I still remember the sound of footsteps from upstairs and the absolute terror of standing in that abandoned garage, looking at the personal items collected from travelers who had walked through that door and never walked back out. The RCMP closed my report as unfounded, but I've done research since that night. I've looked into missing persons cases in that area, disappearances over the past 30 years, and the terrifying pattern is undeniable. 17 people have gone missing in a 20-mile radius around Reston's service station since it closed in 1997. 17 people, all of them long-haul drivers or travelers, all of them on the highway late at night, all of them in winter conditions. 17 disappearances that were all reported as simple lost travelers, people who ran off the road or drove into blizzards, circumstances that all made sense and all seemed unconnected. But they were not unconnected. The eerie, chilling truth is that something is still operating in that abandoned station. Something is still turning on the lights at 4 in the morning. Something is still attracting desperate travelers with the promise of fuel and warmth. Something is still collecting their belongings in that garage and storing memories of its victims. The property records say the station is empty. The authorities say nothing is wrong. But I know the truth. And if you, a driver on Route 6, if you find yourself running low on fuel in the middle of a winter night, and you see lights blazing in what looks like an abandoned service station, I am asking you to keep driving. No matter how desperate you are, no matter how cold it is, no matter how far the next town seems, because Reston's service station is still open, the last stop is still waiting, and something inside that building has been hungry for a very long time. The fear of stopping on that highway might save your life. The darkness and the cold and the isolation are better than what waits for you behind those lights. Trust the terrifying emptiness of the road. Trust the danger you can see. Because the real horror, the most disturbing and chilling truth, is the danger you cannot see, waiting patiently in an abandoned building that officially does not exist. The station is real. I know it is. And it is still hunting. Story 4. Dog of the Ditch. A black hound that follows ice road drivers. I saw it following my truck for 15 kilometers before I understood what was happening. A black dog. Massive. Impossibly fast, running alongside Highway 10 in the Manitoba darkness at speeds that no animal should be able to maintain. Every time I looked in my mirror, it was there, galloping through the snow like it was chasing something, like it was chasing me. And when I realized what I was seeing, when the horror of it fully registered, I pulled off the highway and didn't drive again until sunlight broke through the darkness. My name is Derek. I am a long-haul trucker, and they've been driving the highways of northern North America for 26 years. I've seen plenty of strange things in the darkness. Deer that seem to appear and vanish in the beam of my headlights. Roadside figures that don't quite look right. The paranoid, distorted perceptions that come from driving alone for too many hours in the cold and dark. But nothing prepared me for what I encountered on Highway 10, and nothing has prepared me for what I've learned since that night. The local trucker community calls it the dog of the ditch. It is folklore, mostly. The kind of story that gets passed around at truck stops and in CB radio channels when people are bored and trying to scare each other. But over the past 15 years, I've noticed that this particular legend has a lot more corroboration than most. Too many drivers reporting similar experiences. Too much consistency in the descriptions. Too many people suffering unexplained mechanical failures in the days following a sighting. The folklore goes back a long way. Indigenous peoples in the region have stories about a black hound that appears in winter, a creature that follows travelers and brings bad fortune to those who see it. Early European settlers reported similar sightings, a creature described as dog-shaped but wrong in some indefinable way. Too large, too fast, moving with an intelligence and purpose that no animal should possess. The locals started calling it the dog of the ditch because it was often seen running in the roadside ditches, keeping pace with vehicles, never quite stepping onto the highway itself, but always visible just at the edge of the light cast by headlights. Most truckers treat the legend as entertainment. They laugh about it in the radio channels. They make jokes about seeing the cursed hound and suffering immediate engine failure. It has become a running gag in the community. But there is an underlying current of something darker in those conversations. A genuine nervousness. A real fear hidden beneath the humor. I started paying attention to the stories about 4 years ago when my best friend, a trucker named Steve, told me about his encounter. Steve is not a superstitious person. He is a practical guy, skeptical about most of the folklore and urban legends that circulate in the trucking community. But when he told me about seeing the black dog, there was something in his voice that I had never heard before. A genuine fear, a kind of traumatized uncertainty that suggested he experienced something that had fundamentally changed his understanding of reality. Steve said he'd been driving Highway 10 late at night when he saw it. A massive black shape in the ditch, running parallel to his truck. He said it was definitely a dog, but wrong. The proportions were wrong. The speed was impossibly fast. And most disturbing, when it looked toward his vehicle, he swore he could see intelligence in its eyes. Not animal intelligence, something else, something aware and purposeful and fundamentally hostile. Steve said he tried to drive faster, to get away from it. But the dog matched his speed effortlessly. For about 10 kilometers, it ran alongside his truck, Then his engine started making a strange noise, a grinding sound that hadn't been there before. Within a few more kilometers, his truck started to overheat. His temperature gauge climbed into the danger zone. He managed to coast to a truck stop before the engine seized completely. The mechanic who looked at his truck couldn't find anything wrong. The engine was fine. All the components checked out. But Steve's truck had to be completely rebuilt anyway. Something about the way the internal mechanisms had been damaged was consistent with extreme stress, but there was no obvious cause. It was like something had been wrong with the engine at a fundamental level, as if the metal itself had been damaged by extreme forces. After his encounter, Steve stopped driving Highway 10. He took routes that avoided the area, even if they were longer. He told me he couldn't face the possibility of seeing that thing again. He said that knowing it was out there, somewhere in the Manitoba darkness, waiting and watching, was more than his psyche could handle. When Steve told me his story, I dismissed most of it. I figured he'd seen a wolf or a wild dog and let fear and exhaustion distort the experience into something more sinister. But I started paying attention to the CB radio chatter with new interest, and I started noticing patterns in the conversations that I never caught before. There was a dedicated group of truckers who actively discussed sightings of the black dog. They had a network. They kept a log of reported encounters. They documented the dates, times, locations, and most importantly, the mechanical failures that followed. The data was remarkable. Nearly 90% of drivers who reported seeing the dog experienced some kind of mechanical failure within 48 hours of the sighting. Engine problems, transmission issues, brake failure, electrical malfunctions, tire blowouts that seemed to happen at the worst possible moments. The failures were consistent enough to rule out coincidence, but varied enough that it seemed impossible to identify a single cause. It was like something was targeting specific vehicles, causing damage that appeared random but was actually carefully engineered to create maximum danger. One trucker named Patricia, who ran the online forum dedicated to tracking these sightings, sent me a private message. She told me she'd been monitoring the phenomenon for 8 years. She said the sightings were increasing in frequency. In the first few years, there might be 2 or 3 reported sightings per month. Now there were 5 or 6 reports every week, and the geographic range was expanding. Sightings that had previously been limited to Highway 10 were now being reported on Highway 16, Highway 6, and several of the secondary roads that connected Manitoba to Saskatchewan and Ontario. Patricia also mentioned something that was deeply unsettling. She said that some drivers, after seeing the black dog, reported psychological changes in addition to the mechanical failures. Nightmares, paranoia, a lingering sense that they were being watched. A few drivers had quit the profession entirely, abandoning long careers because they couldn't shake the feeling that the dog was still following them, still running alongside their vehicles even when they weren't driving. I listened to Patricia. It's information with growing dread. I'd been driving for over 2 decades without incident. I'd never seen anything that I couldn't explain through conventional means. But I knew the stories. I knew the folklore. And I knew that if I ever encountered that black shape in the ditch, if I ever saw those intelligent, hostile eyes watching my truck, everything would change. Then it happened. I was driving Highway 10 heading east toward Winnipeg at 2 in the morning. The road was clear, the visibility was good, and the temperature was hovering around -20. Perfect driving conditions for winter in Manitoba. I was listening to a podcast to stay alert, not paying particular attention to the darkness around me, just focused on maintaining a steady speed and watching for black ice. That is when I saw the movement in the ditch. At first, I thought it was a wolf. I'd seen wolves before on these roads, usually running away from the highway, scared of the vehicles. But this thing wasn't running away. It was running parallel to my truck. I could see it clearly in my headlights. A massive black shape, fur-matted and dark, moving with incredible speed and grace. But the moment I really registered what I was seeing, I knew it wasn't the wolf. The size was wrong. The proportions were wrong. The way it moved was wrong. It was dog-shaped, but it was wrong. And when it turned its head and looked directly at my truck, when I caught a glimpse of its eyes reflecting the headlight beam, I understood what everyone had been afraid of. Those eyes weren't animal. They were intelligent, aware, filled with something that might have been hatred or hunger or both. For just a fraction of a second, I felt like I was being evaluated. Like something vast and dark was assessing me, deciding if I was worth following, worth hunting, worth cursing with mechanical failure and nightmares. Then it was gone. I must have blinked or looked away, because when I looked back at the ditch, the black dog had vanished. But I could feel it. I knew it was still there, still matching my speed, still running alongside my vehicle. I couldn't see it anymore, but I could sense its presence with uncertainty that went beyond logic or rational thought. My heart was pounding. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. Everything in my body was screaming at me to accelerate, to escape, to get away from that thing as fast as my truck could possibly move. But I forced myself to maintain my speed. I forced myself to keep driving normally. I was terrified that if I panicked, if I made any sudden movements, that thing would do something worse than just follow. For the next 15 kilometers, I drove in a state of pure terror. Every time I looked in my mirror, I expected to see that massive black shape. Every time I checked my instruments, I expected to see warning lights indicating mechanical failure. But nothing happened. The dog didn't reappear. My truck continued functioning normally. The highway stretched endlessly ahead into the darkness. And then, suddenly, I was out of its territory. I felt it the moment the presence lifted. The oppressive weight of being hunted vanished, replaced by something almost like relief, though my terror didn't diminish. I knew what I experienced. I knew what that thing was. And I knew I was one of the lucky ones who had encountered it and survived without immediate mechanical disaster. I pulled into a truck stop about 30 kilometers down the road and didn't drive again until dawn. When the sun came up, I checked my truck carefully. Everything looked fine. No warning lights, no strange noises, but I knew the mechanical failures could come later. They might not manifest until I was back on the road, when I was most vulnerable. I've been documenting my experience. I've been monitoring my truck obsessively, watching for any signs of the damage that has plagued other drivers. So far, nothing has occurred, but I know it is coming. I can feel it. The black dog left something with me, some kind of mark or curse that will eventually manifest. It's just a matter of time. I've also been researching the folklore more deeply. I've talked to indigenous elders who are willing to share stories about the creature. They call it something that translates roughly to the watcher between worlds. They say it's not evil in the human sense. It's something older than human morality. Something that exists to mark travelers, to test them, to see if they are worthy of safe passage or deserving of curse. The eerie part is that the sightings seem to be concentrated in areas where there was significant tragedy or death in the past. Highway 10 passes through regions where there were indigenous massacres, colonial conflicts, and countless traffic accidents. The roads themselves are soaked in death. And according to the folklore, the black dog appears wherever death has been concentrated, wherever suffering has left deep marks on the landscape. The increasing frequency of sightings suggests that something is changing. Either the barriers between worlds are weakening, or the dog is becoming more active for reasons we don't understand. Either way, more and more drivers are going to encounter it. More and more people are going to experience that bone-deep terror of being hunted by something they can understand and can escape. I am considering quitting. I've been a trucker for my entire adult life, but I don't know if I can face the possibility of seeing that thing again. I don't know if I can live with the knowledge that it is out there in the darkness, running through the ditches alongside the highways, watching for drivers, evaluating them, deciding who deserves to be marked with curse and mechanical failure and nightmares that never end. If you drive these roads in winter, if they ever felt that sudden chill of being watched, if they ever seen movement in the ditch that didn't quite look right, you might have encountered it. You might have felt its presence. And if you have, then you know what I'm talking about. You know that the horror of that experience goes beyond anything that rational explanation can address. The dog of the ditch is real. It is out there. And it is following more drivers than we want to admit. Every night, when the temperature drops and the darkness gets deep enough, it is running through the ditches of Manitoba, its highways. Watching, waiting, following, and eventually it will decide if you worth the curse. Story 5. Snowbound SOS. A solo driver. One night. No signal. The moment my engine died, I knew something was profoundly wrong. Not because the car simply stalled. That would have been manageable. No, what made my skin crawl was the absolute silence that followed. The wind outside had stopped. The tires were frozen against the asphalt. Even the snow seemed to hold its breath on this godforsaken stretch of Highway 10. somewhere between Winnipeg and nowhere at 11:47 at night. I turned the key again. Nothing. The dashboard lights flickered once, twice, then surrendered. I sat there in the creeping darkness, my breath fogging the windshield, understanding with horrifying clarity that I had become trapped in the kind of eerie, terrifying situation that people read about in missing persons reports. The scenario was simple enough. I had been driving back from my sister's wedding in Winnipeg, tired but determined to push through instead of paying for another motel. My truck had over 200,000 miles on it, but I just had it serviced. What could go wrong? Everything, as it turned out. Everything could go wrong on a winter road. I checked my phone. No signal. Of course there was an T. This stretch of highway cuts through frozen prairie where the world seems to end. Just white emptiness on both sides, punctuated by dark tree lines that look like teeth. The kind of disturbing, unsettling landscape that plays tricks on your mind when you alone at night. I'd driven this road a dozen times, but something about tonight felt different. Chilling, like the darkness had weight and intention. I turned the key one more time, just to be sure. The engine coughed weakly, struggling like something drowning. Then silence again. The heater had already begun to fade before the car died completely, and now the cold was seeping in through the vents, through the door seals, through what felt like the walls themselves. My breath came faster. I forced myself to breathe slowly, methodically, the way my father had taught me during my first winter drive as a teenager. Okay, think. I had a blanket in the back seat. I had half a tank of gas, though that meant nothing now. I had a first aid kit, a jack, jumper cables, and that most useless tool of all in situations like this, my dead cell phone. The nearest town was Pine Falls, maybe 20 miles back. The next one forward was Brandon, 30 miles ahead in the creeping darkness. Both felt impossibly far. I tried the ignition again. Nothing. The battery was dead, which shouldn't have been possible. But here I was, alone on a frozen highway, staring at a dashboard that had gone completely dark. That is when I noticed the headlights. They appeared through the snowfall, distant and red, coming toward me from the direction of Brandon. My initial relief was powerful and immediate. A car. Another human being. Help. I flashed my headlights frantically, forgetting for a moment that my lights were as dead as everything else in this cursed vehicle. The red headlights grew closer, closer, moving steadily down the highway toward me. I could see their shape now, a large truck, maybe a semi, its cab high and dark against the nightmare sky. It was maybe half a mile away, then a quarter mile, then close enough that I should have been able to see the driver, read the lettering on the side, understand what kind of rescue this might be. Then the headlights simply vanished. Not gradually, not as if the truck had turned onto a side road or switched off its lights. They just ceased to exist. One moment they were bearing down on me, real and bright and promising, and the next moment the highway before me was as dark and empty as it had been before. I stared through the windshield, my heart hammering against my ribs, trying to rationalize what I just witnessed. A bridge, maybe, some kind of dip in the road that had hidden the truck from view. But there was no bridge here. The highway was flat, straight, and utterly featureless for miles in every direction. I knew this road. I didn't imagine it. I checked my phone again, though I knew it was pointless. Still no signal. The time on the screen showed 12:17 in the morning. I could have sworn only 10 minutes had passed since my engine died. I set the phone on the passenger seat and stared at it, as if the device itself had become a dangerous, unsettling thing. The battery was at 7%, and there was nothing I could do to preserve it now. The cold was becoming more serious. My breath was coming in clouds, and the windows were starting to fog and freeze. I pulled the blanket from the back seat and wrapped it around myself, huddling in the driver's seat. Every horror story I ever heard about winter road deaths played through my mind. People who froze in their cars while waiting for rescue. People whose engines quit and who didn't have the sense to stay put and wait. People who thought walking would be faster, easier, and who were found weeks later, just miles from help. That is when I heard the sound. It started as a low scraping, as if something heavy was being dragged across the asphalt outside. I froze, listening, trying to place it. The sound grew louder, more insistent, moving down the highway in my direction. Not a vehicle, something else. Something that was moving along the road itself, from back toward Pine Falls, heading toward Brandon, heading directly toward my stalled truck. The scraping was horrifying. It moved with deliberate slowness, dragging and pausing, dragging again. My hands gripped the steering wheel. Every instinct screamed at me to lock the doors, to turn around and look, to do anything but sit perfectly still. The darkness outside was absolute now, a living thing pressing against the windows. I couldn't see anything beyond the glass except my own terrified reflection staring back at me. The scraping grew louder. It was definitely moving toward me. I could hear it now on the shoulder of the road, that eerie, grinding sound of something being pulled across frozen earth and snow. My breath came in short, panicked gasps. The sound reached the side of my truck. I could hear it right there, just outside the passenger window, moving past my door, something shifting the very air around the vehicle with its rawness and disturbing presence. Then it stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the sound itself. I waited, counting my heartbeats, expecting something terrible to happen. The door to explode inward. A hand to smash through the window. Something. Anything. But nothing came. The highway outside remained perfectly still. After what might have been 5 minutes or 5 hours, I looked over my shoulder at the back window, trying to see if there was anything behind the truck. The headlights appeared again. This time they were behind me, stationary, stopped on the highway about 100 yards back. I could see the silhouette of a vehicle now, parked and waiting, its lights cutting through the darkness in a way that felt predatory and chilling. I watched those headlights for a long time, afraid to move, afraid to make any sound that might draw attention. The driver was doing the same, I realized. Watching, waiting. Neither of us wanted to make the first move. My phone buzzed in the darkness. 1% battery. A text had somehow gotten through. It was from my sister. "Did you make it home yet?" The message had been sent 4 hours ago. 4 hours. I looked at the clock on my phone. It showed 3:42 in the morning. But I'd only been stopped for minutes. Maybe an hour at most. I started the truck again. Impossible as it seemed, the engine turned over on the first try, as if the last hour had been nothing but a terrible dream. The headlights behind me were gone. The highway ahead was empty. My phone was dead now. Completely dead, the screen black and useless. I drove forward, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the wheel, terrified that if I looked in the mirror, I would see those headlights behind me again, following, creeping closer. Never quite close enough to reveal what was driving, just close enough to know I was being pursued by something that didn't follow normal rules. I drove for hours after that, never stopping, never slowing down, watching the darkness and the snow and the endless highway stretch out before me. When I finally reached Brandon just as dawn was breaking, I pulled into a gas station and sat in the parking lot, shaking, trying to make sense of what had happened. The station attendant asked if I was okay. I nodded, paid for gas with shaking hands, and didn't tell him anything. What would I have said? That I lost 4 hours on a road that should have taken 90 minutes? That I heard something dragging itself along the asphalt in the darkness? That headlights had appeared and vanished like something from a nightmare? I drove home in broad daylight. I haven't been back to that road since. But sometimes, when I am driving at night and I see headlights behind me in the darkness, I feel that same spike of terror. That same knowledge that on that particular stretch of Highway 10, something is still waiting. Something still dragging itself through the snow. Something that watches for the next solitary driver who makes the mistake of breaking down on that frozen, terrifying, endless road. Story 6. Missing Motel Logbook. Names that vanished overnight. I worked the night shift at the North Star Motel on Highway 10, about 15 miles outside of Portage La Prairie, Manitoba. I've been doing this job for 7 years. The pay is terrible. The hours are lonely, and the work is mindless. But it is steady, and I've never had anything happen that was remotely interesting until the names started disappearing. The motel is exactly what you'd expect from a 1970s roadside establishment trying desperately to stay relevant in a world that has moved past it. 48 rooms arranged in an L shape around a parking lot. A small office with a window facing the highway. CCTV cameras installed in 2009 that barely work anymore. Their footage grainy and unreliable. The motel serves the winter travelers, people passing through Manitoba who get caught in storms or bad timing and need a place to sleep. I work midnight to 8 in the morning. My job is simple. Check people in, hand them keys, answer the occasional phone call, watch for problems. Most nights are quiet, boring. I sit behind the desk with my coffee and my phone, watching the empty parking lot and counting down the hours until dawn. The logbook is the only thing that is genuinely interesting about the job. It's an old leather-bound thing, The kind motels used before computers, though we have a computer system too. But the manager, Tom, still insists on keeping the physical logbook. He likes to see who is coming and going, he says. He likes to have a record of faces and names in a way that digital data doesn't to provide. So every guest who checks in writes their name, vehicle information, and room number in the logbook. It was a Thursday night in November when I first noticed something eerie. A man came in around 11:30, driving a pickup truck with Alberta plates. He was tired, the kind of exhausted that comes from driving for 12 hours straight, the kind that makes you desperate for a bed and heat and somewhere warm to sleep. He checked in, wrote his name in the logbook as David Mitchell, room 23, and went out to park his truck. I noted his information like always, room 23, David Mitchell, Alberta plates, the terrifying details of a life that would soon become meaningless. At 6 in the morning, I did what I always do. I reviewed the logbook to prepare the morning report for Tom. This is a routine procedure. Check the names, count the rooms, note any issues. I opened the logbook to the correct page and looked for the entry from the night before. The name was gone. Not erased, not crossed out, just gone. The page was blank where David Mitchell, this entry had been. The handwriting, the information, everything had vanished. The blank space remained, like something had been surgically removed from the paper itself. I checked my computer records. They still showed David Mitchell in room 23. The motel system still had him registered, but the physical logbook had no trace of him. The unsettling sensation started creeping up my spine, that primitive feeling that something was fundamentally wrong with the world. I went back to room 23 and knocked on the door. No answer. I tried knocking harder. Still nothing. I called Tom and told him the room wasn't responding to wake-up calls, and he told me to go check it out. He sounded annoyed, like this was a normal problem, like people who didn't check out at the proper time were just part of the job. I used my master key and opened the door. The room was empty, not just empty of people, but empty of everything. The bed was made, the furniture was clean, there was no indication that anyone had been inside the room at all. No luggage, no belongings, no sign that David Mitchell had ever existed in that space. But the thermostat showed it had been set to 72 degrees. The room temperature was warm. Someone had been in that room. Someone had used the heating. Someone had slept in that bed. But there was no physical evidence of that person anywhere. I checked the CCTV footage for the parking lot. The cameras were running, though the image quality was grainy and difficult to work with. I could see David Mitchell pull into the lot in his pickup truck around 11:45. I could see him get out and walk to his room. I could see him go inside room 23 and close the door. But there was no footage of him ever leaving that room. The next shot that would have captured the door opening showed nothing. Just the closed door, the dark window, the empty parking lot beyond. The footage from the next morning showed the truck still parked in front of room 23. But by the time I arrived at 8 to do the morning walkthrough, the truck was gone. Someone had moved it, driven it away, left the motel without checking out. Without saying a word, Tom reviewed the tape with me later that morning. He looked at the grainy footage, at the man walking into the room, at the absence of any exit, and he said something that made my skin crawl. That happens sometimes, he said. His voice was flat, matter of fact, like he was describing weather. People just disappear. Don, to check out. Don, to leave. They were just gone. I asked him what he meant by that, and he said he didn't, He said it had been happening for years, since before I started working there. People would check in, he would see them in the logbook, and the next morning their names would be erased. Their rooms would be empty. Their vehicles would be gone. It was like they'd never been there at all. The disturbing realization that he wasn't concerned about this, that he had simply accepted it as a normal part of motel operations, made me question everything about my job, everything about Tom, everything about the North Star Motel itself. Over the next month, it happened again. 3 more times. November 18th, a woman named Sarah Chen checked in around midnight. She wrote her name in the logbook in careful, precise handwriting. I gave her the key to room 31. The next morning, her name had vanished from the logbook. Her room was empty. Her car was gone. November 29th, 2 men, Marcus Webb and James Hawley, checked in together around 1 in the morning. They parked a Honda Civic with Ontario plates in front of room 19. They wrote their names in the logbook. Both names vanished by morning. The room was empty. The car was gone. December 7th. An older man named Robert Frank checked in the afternoon, before my shift started. but Tom had written his name in the logbook. When I reviewed the book during my shift, I could see the entry. Robert Frank, room 12, blue Chevrolet. By the next morning, the name was gone. The room was empty. The car had disappeared during the night. The eerie pattern was impossible to ignore. People were vanishing from the logbook. People were disappearing from their rooms. People were driving away in the middle of the night without checking out, without saying goodbye, as if the motel had never happened to them at all. I started keeping detailed records, photocopies of the logbook pages after each shift, notes about the guests, CCTV footage that I saved to my personal computer. I became obsessed with understanding what was happening at the North Star Motel, with documenting the impossible disappearances. The CCTV footage was always the same. The guests would arrive, they would check in, they would go to their rooms, and then they would vanish. Not leave the motel, not check out, vanish. The footage would simply stop showing them, as if they'd been edited out of reality itself. I asked Tom about it directly. I confronted him in the office one morning and demanded to know what was happening. He looked at me with an expression of profound sadness. And then he told me something that made the terrifying truth begin to crystallize. He said the motel was a trap. He said it had been a trap since the 1970s, since a terrible accident had happened in one of the rooms and something had changed about the place. He said the motel fed on travelers. He said the logbook wasn't just a record. It was a collection. Every name written in that book was a name of someone the motel was keeping, someone it had claimed. The creepy sensation that had been building over the past month turned into absolute, paralyzing fear. Tom said the names vanished because the people were no longer coming or going. They were becoming part of the motel. They were being absorbed into it. The rooms would feel a little warmer. The beds would sleep a little better. The hallways would be a little less lonely. The motel was growing by consuming people. He said he stayed because he had nowhere else to go. He said he was dependent on the motel, that it had already claimed part of him, and he couldn't leave even if he wanted to. He said every person who worked the night shift eventually figured out the truth, and eventually they stopped trying to fight it. The unsettling implication was that I would be the same, that I would eventually stop leaving when my shift ended, that I would become part of the motel too. I quit that day. I told Tom I was done, that I couldn't work there anymore, that I was going to the police with everything I had documented. Tom just smiled. He said the police wouldn't find anything. He said the motel would simply erase the evidence. He said the names would disappear from my photocopies. The CCTV footage would become corrupted. Everything I had documented would slowly, subtly, become unreliable and impossible to prove. I didn't believe him. I went home and checked my photocopies of the logbook pages. The names were gone, all of them. David Mitchell, Sarah Chan, Marcus Webb, James Hawley, Robert Frank. Every name I had copied, every name that had vanished from the original logbook, had also vanished from my copies. The papers were blank where their entries had been. The CCTV footage on my computer was corrupted, unwatchable. All of the files I had saved had become damaged, the data unrecoverable. The terrifying, chilling truth became undeniable. Tom was right. The motel was erasing evidence. The motel was protecting itself. The motel was continuing to hunt. I called the RCMP and told them everything. The officer who took my statement listened politely and then told me there were no reports of missing persons matching my descriptions. He said the North Star Motel had a clean record. He said there was no evidence of any criminal activity at that location. I asked about Tom. The officer said there was no motel manager by that name currently employed at the North Star Motel. He said they had checked, and the current manager was a woman named Patricia Hollis who had worked there for 3 years. The horrifying realization hit me like a physical force. Tom had already become part of the motel. He was no longer a person. He had been absorbed, and the motel had replaced him with someone else, or something that wore the shape of someone else, something that could perform the function of night manager without any of the memories or personality that a human night manager would have. I haven't gone back. I haven't tried to fight it. I simply documented what I know, and I am telling you this story in the hope that someone will understand, that someone will believe, that someone will prevent others from stopping at the North Star Motel. The eerie, chilling truth is that some places are not what they seem. Some buildings are not just buildings. Some motels are hunting grounds. And the names in the logbook are not just records of stays. They are records of acquisitions. Every guest who checks in and vanishes is another layer of the motel, is hunger satisfied. The North Star Motel is still operating. It is still checking in guests. It is still erasing their names from the logbook. It is still feeding. And somewhere in that building, in those rooms, in the spaces between the walls, the people are still there. Not alive, not dead, just existing in a state the living mind cannot comprehend. Part of the motel, this fabric, part of its structure, part of something that should never be disturbed. If you read driving through Manitoba on Highway 10 at night and you see the North Star Motel, keep driving. No matter how tired you are, no matter how cold it is, no matter how much you need a place to sleep, because the motel is waiting, the logbook is waiting, and your name is going to look so beautiful written in that old leather book before it vanishes forever. Story 719 car pileup at dawn. Highway 59, this winter nightmare. I don't know if I'm ready to tell you this. Even now, 3 years later, my hands shake when I think about that morning. But you need to hear what happened on Highway 59. You need to understand what the road took from us. The creepy, eerie darkness of a Manitoba winter night is nothing like what people down south experience. It is not just darkness. It is suffocation. It's the kind of black that makes you question if your headlights are even working. That night, the temperature had dropped to minus 32 degrees, and the wind was doing something terrible to the air itself, turning it into a living thing that clawed at your windshield. I was driving home from Winnipeg. Stupid decision. I know that now. The weather forecast said the blizzard wouldn't hit until after midnight. I trusted the forecast. I trusted my instincts. Both were horrifying mistakes. The highway stretched out in front of me like a frozen throat. Nothing but white. Endless white, broken only by the yellow line that kept disappearing and reappearing. My tires hummed against the ice. The radio played something forgettable. I kept my speed at 50 miles an hour, which felt fast enough in those conditions. My breath fogged the windshield no matter how high I turned the defroster. Around 2 in the morning, the cell phone signal died completely. That's when I realized I hadn't seen another car for maybe 20 minutes. The isolation hit me then. That specific kind of terror you feel when you understand just how alone you really are. Miles from the nearest town. Miles from help. If something happened, if my engine failed, if I hit black ice and went off the road, nobody would find me until morning. Maybe not even then. The wind picked up. I could hear it now over my engine, a haunting, chilling wail that seemed to come from every direction at once. The snow started falling thicker, heavier, and suddenly my headlights weren't cutting through anymore. They were just bouncing off a wall of white, almost blinding me. This is when I should have pulled over. This is when a reasonable person would have found a place to stop and wait for the storm to pass. But I didn't. I kept going. That was my first mistake. After another hour, I started to see something odd. The snow was swirling in patterns that didn't match the wind. It was moving sideways, sometimes upward, other times, as if multiple storms were colliding above the highway. The unsettling feeling grew stronger. Something wasn't right about this weather. It felt deliberate, purposeful, like the winter itself was hunting me. Then I saw the lights. They appeared first as a faint glow in the distance, red and yellow, dancing through the snow. Taillights, multiple vehicles, lined up on the road ahead. My stomach dropped. Even at a distance, I could sense something was very wrong. The lights weren't moving. They were just sitting there, stacked up like a graveyard of cars. As I got closer, I saw the reality of what I was approaching. A massive pileup. 19 cars, emergency vehicles confirmed it later. The crash had happened at dawn, in the heart of the worst whiteout conditions of the season. What I was witnessing in real time was the aftermath, and I was driving straight into the middle of it. The first car I came to was a semi-truck, its cab completely crushed against a concrete overpass support. Behind it, a minivan twisted at an impossible angle. Then another car, and another, and another. A horrifying chain of metal and shattered glass extending down the highway like the spine of some dead monster. I slammed on my brakes. The ice grabbed my tires immediately, and for a terrifying second I thought I was going to add myself to this catastrophe. But somehow I stopped, sliding to a halt maybe 50 feet from the nearest wreckage. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. The darkness, absolute and complete, pressed in from every side. My headlights illuminated only fragments of the disaster, a twisted bumper here, a smashed windshield there, a shoe lying on the frozen asphalt that made me want to scream. The radio had gone to pure static. I knew what I was supposed to do. Call for help. Get out and check on people. Be a good human being. But my car door wouldn't open. Ice had sealed it shut in the brutal cold. I tried the other doors, all frozen solid. It's when the real fear started creeping in, the kind that comes from understanding you might be trapped. I tried my cell phone. No signal. Nothing but the creepy, eerie glow of no service in the corner of the screen. The radio stayed on static, a hissing white noise that filled my car and made it impossible to think clearly. It's when I noticed something that made my blood turn to ice water. The other cars in the pileup, the ones I could see in my headlights, none of them had their lights on. No headlights, no taillights, nothing. They were just dark shapes in the darkness, utterly lifeless and terrifyingly still. But that wasn't the worst part. Some of them had their doors open, wide open, hanging off their hinges, exposed to the brutal wind and cold. Empty doors, no bodies lying nearby, no indication of where the people had gone. I sat there, staring at those impossible open doors, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. The wind screamed across the highway. The temperature inside my car was already dropping. 45 minutes had passed since I stopped, maybe longer. Time felt distorted, wrong, like it wasn't flowing at a normal pace anymore. Then I saw a figure. It was standing on the road, about 30 cars down the line, just visible in the edge of my headlights. Tall, impossibly still, despite the howling wind. No coat, no hat, no protection against the horrifying cold at all. Just standing there in what looked like regular clothes, unmoving, facing away from me. I watched it for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. It didn't move, didn't even appear to be breathing, though that was impossible from this distance. Then, very slowly, it turned its head. Not its whole body, just the head, rotating with a mechanical precision that made my skin crawl. I couldn't see its face. The distance and the darkness made details impossible. But I could feel it looking at me. I could feel the weight of its attention like a physical force. The shadow in my peripheral vision moved. There was someone standing outside my car window. I hadn't seen them approach. They were just suddenly there, on the other side of the glass, their hand up against the window. Fingers splayed out. Long, too long, and the skin looked wrong. Grayish blue and ice covered in a way that suggested they'd been outside in this nightmare weather far too long. I didn't scream. I couldn't. My voice had locked up completely. All I could do was stare at that hand, that impossible hand, and try to understand what I was seeing. The face behind the hand was obscured, tilted down, features hidden. But the mouth was open, wide open, and inside I could see nothing but darkness, deeper than the night outside my window, deeper than anything natural. The disturbing, chilling certainty flooded through me that this thing had been in that pileup, that it was dead, that something had happened to these people, something that the whiteout and the darkness and the isolation had done to them, and now they weren't quite people anymore. The hand pressed harder against the glass. I could hear scratching, a sound like fingernails on crystal, over and over, patient and methodical and utterly terrifying. I jerked the key, and the engine roared to life somehow, through the cold, through the everything against me. It roared. I didn't plan. I just floored the accelerator and cranked the wheel toward the shoulder. The car fishtailed immediately, the tires finding no grip on the ice. I was sliding, spinning, completely out of control, and all I could think was that I was going to end up in that pileup after all, that whatever had happened to those 19 vehicles was going to happen to me. But I didn't stop. Somehow, miraculously, I didn't hit anything. I got the car pointed back the way I'd come, and I kept the accelerator down despite every instinct screaming that I would lose control completely. In my mirror, I saw shapes moving toward me, at least a dozen of them, maybe more, walking between the cars in the pileup, all with that same impossible, patient pace. Shambling might have been the word, except for the precision of their movements. They weren't trying to run me down. They were just walking toward where my car had been, step after step, with the eerie inevitability of something that doesn't need to breathe or tire. I don't remember the next hour of driving. The road was a blur of white and darkness, my headlights finally burning through the whiteout as I got south of the storm, the creepy fog finally lifting from the road ahead. But I remember pulling into a gas station outside Brandon, Manitoba, at 4:30 in the morning. I remember walking inside, my legs barely supporting me, my mind shattered into pieces I haven't to quite manage to reassemble. The attendant took one look at me and called for help. What I told the RCMP took 3 hours to recount. They found the pileup right where I said it was. 19 vehicles, confirmed. But there was no evidence of what I'd seen. No figures, no open doors, just the wreckage. And the investigation revealed something even more unsettling. The pileup had started with a single vehicle stalling on the ice. Surveillance footage from a truck stop camera, the only recording they could find, showed it happening in complete whiteout conditions. A commercial truck had lost power, coasted to a stop. Then, one by one, other vehicles had slammed into it. Cars just kept coming through the darkness, kept hitting the wreckage, a horrifying chain reaction that lasted maybe 4 minutes. But here is what broke me. Here is what still keeps me awake. The footage showed something in the snow around the stalled truck before the pileup even began. Movement, shapes, multiple figures standing on the highway in the middle of the blizzard, just existing there in the nightmare cold, motionless, patient. The investigator who reviewed the tape said they looked like people waiting for something. They said the stalled truck appeared to have swerved deliberately toward them, as if the driver had seen them and lost control trying to avoid them. 12 people died in the pileup. 12. The rest walked away or were transported to the hospital in Winnipeg. But here is the thing that haunts me most. Every single survivor reported the same experience during the crash. They all said they blacked out, lost consciousness, and didn't. Do you remember what happened? When they woke up, they were already in the hospital, already being treated. Hours had passed for them as if they were a single second. And every survivor reported nightmares in the weeks after. The same nightmare, a dream about standing on the highway in darkness, in terrible cold, just waiting, alongside others who weren't quite people anymore. The RCMP closed the investigation as a winter accident. Weather, black ice, visibility, a stalled vehicle, and terrible luck. But I know what happened on Highway 59 that morning. I know what I saw. I know that something lives in that winter darkness, something that collects people through the nightmare conditions, something that uses the blizzard and the ice and the isolation as a hunting ground. And 3 years later, I still don't drive in winter. I still want to travel on those northern highways after dark. Because I know what is waiting in the snow, patient and endless and terrifying, in that absolute, consuming darkness. The highway remembers. The road takes what it wants. And it's still hungry. Story 8. Long-haul phantom. Trucker logs that stop at 3:12 a.m. I've been driving trucks for 28 years. 28 years of early mornings, late nights, endless highways, and the kind of isolation that either breaks you or teaches you who you really are. I've survived blizzards, black ice, mechanical failures in the middle of nowhere, and encounters with every kind of road hazard you can imagine. But nothing prepared me for what happened on the stretch between Brandon and the Saskatchewan border. Nothing could have prepared me for the terrifying discovery that I wasn't the first. The logs started appearing 3 months before I experienced it myself. At the truck stop outside Winnipeg, guys were talking about something eerie happening on the northern routes. Convoys stopping dead in their tracks around 3 in the morning. Radio silence lasting hours. RCMP getting calls about stalled vehicles, then those same vehicles disappearing before the patrol cars could reach them. It sounded like the kind of urban legend truckers tell each other to pass the time on long hauls, the creepy folklore of the road. I didn't believe it at first. Then I started paying attention to the logs. Real trucker logs, printed out and posted at the truck stop bulletin board. These weren't stories. These were official records, the kind drivers are required to keep for insurance and safety purposes. And they all told the same horrifying tale. October 15th, 3:12 a.m. Convoy of 3 semis, northbound on Highway 6. Log entry, engine temperature rising. Pulling over to check. Next entry, written 12 hours later, engine fine. No memory of lost time. Radio was dead for hours. October 28th, 3:14 a.m. Another convoy, different drivers. Log entry, seeing something in the road ahead. Slowing down. Then nothing. Hours of blank space. The next entry read, Dawn, do you know what happened? The other trucks are gone. Found them 30 miles south, parked at a rest stop. Drivers confused about where hours went. November 3rd, 3:11 a.m. A solo driver this time, which made it worse somehow. Visibility dropping fast. Wind picking up. Something moving on the shoulder. His next entry was written in shaky handwriting. Stopped for 6 hours. Couldn't see anything but darkness. Couldn't to hear anything but wind. When I could drive again, my fuel gauge showed I used only a quarter tank instead of what should have been empty. All of these incidents centered around the same time, 3:12 in the morning, give or take a few minutes. All of them involved hours of missing time, radio blackouts, and that eerie, creepy sensation that something was deeply wrong with what the drivers couldn't quite remember. I mentioned it to Dale, a guy the first they'd known for 15 years, a driver who runs the same routes I do. He went quiet, really quiet, then he told me his story. 3 weeks earlier, Dale had been heading north with a shipment of produce, a routine run he'd done 100 times. He made good time, stayed ahead of a building storm system, felt confident about the drive. But around 2:45 in the morning, he noticed his GPS acting strange. The screen would flicker, show his location in impossible places, then recalibrate. The creepy sensation grew with each glitch. At 3:12 exactly, his radio stopped working. Not turned off, stopped. It went to complete static, and no amount of adjusting could bring it back. That's when he decided to pull over at the next rest area. That's when things got disturbing. The rest area was empty, which wasn't unusual for that hour. But it felt wrong. The lights were all on, the building was lit up, but there was no one there. No staff, no other vehicles. Just an unsettling, eerie emptiness that made Dale's skin crawl. He sat in his cab for what he thought was maybe 20 minutes, waiting for his radio to come back, trying to calm his nerves. Then he looked in his mirror. There was a car behind him. He'd been there before. He was absolutely certain of that. The car was just sitting there, about 50 feet back, its headlights off, completely dark inside. A newer model, something like a sedan, ordinary and unremarkable except for the fact that it absolutely should not have been there. Dale stared at it for what felt like forever but was probably only seconds. The car didn't. He moved. No one got out. The windows were too dark to see inside, but he could feel presence inside it, an awareness focused on him, something watching with an intensity that made his hands shake. He started his engine and drove. When he got to the next truck stop, 40 miles south, he checked his clock. The time was 3:42 in the morning. 30 minutes should have passed, but according to his logbook, according to his tired brain trying to process what had happened, it felt like 3 or 4 hours had gone by. He sat there drinking coffee until dawn, afraid to drive, afraid to be alone, afraid to close his eyes because he couldn't quite remember what the inside of that rest area had looked like, couldn't quite remember if he'd actually gone inside or just sat in his cab the whole time. After Dale told me that story, I decided to do some real research. I got copies of the official RCMP logs from the detachment up north. Cold, factual, terrifying in their bureaucratic precision. October 15th, 3:47 a.m. Report of disabled vehicles on Highway 6. Caller unknown. Dispatcher sent 2 units. Officers reported finding 3 semis parked at a rest area, all engines off, all drivers asleep in their cabs. Drivers reported no memory of stopping. No mechanical issues found. All 3 vehicles cleared to proceed. October 28th, 4:16 a.m. Multiple reports of radio interference on Highway 6. Several truckers reporting complete communication blackout lasting up to 6 hours. RCMP unit dispatched. Upon arrival at coordinates provided, officers found 4 semi-trucks parked at various locations along a 15-mile stretch. All drivers reported the same thing: complete loss of time, memory gaps, and that eerie sensation of something watching them from the darkness. November 2nd, 3:58 a.m. Report of vehicle collision on Highway 6. 2 semis had pulled over simultaneously at the same rest stop, unaware of each other. When the second truck arrived, the drivers nearly collided. Both trucks had pulled over at exactly the same moment, both drivers reporting the same thing: a disturbance in their radio frequency, a chilling presence on the highway, an overwhelming compulsion to stop right there, right then. The RCMP logs ended with a memo to all northern detachments: pattern emerging on Highway 6 corridor, northern section. Incidents cluster around 3 o'clock to 3:30 a.m. during hours of darkness. Recommend warning truckers about possible equipment malfunction or atmospheric phenomenon causing radio interference. No evidence of foul play at this time. No evidence of foul play. I read that line over and over, and the more I read it, the more it seemed like an official way of saying they had no explanation and no idea what was actually happening. That's when I decided I had to know. I had to drive that route myself. deliberately, and see if I could figure out what was really going on. I picked a night in late November. Clear skies, good visibility, no weather concerns. I left Winnipeg at 8 in the evening with a full tank and a shipment of automotive parts heading to Saskatchewan. I told myself I was just doing my job, that I was being logical and professional. But deep down, I knew I was hunting for something. I was deliberately driving into a nightmare to try to understand it. The first part of the drive was normal, boring, even. The highway stretched out in front of me, illuminated by my headlights, mile after mile of empty road and empty prairie. The darkness pressed down from above, absolute and complete, the kind of darkness you only find far from cities, far from civilization. I stayed ahead of my schedule, kept my speed steady, tried not to think about the logs, the missing time, the terrifying pattern that nobody could explain. At 2:45 in the morning, I saw the first sign that something was different. The road ahead seemed to shimmer, not like heat waves, but something more unsettling, a distortion in the air itself that made my headlights seem to bend around it. The creepy sensation started then, that primitive part of my brain that is supposed to keep you alive, sending urgent signals that something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. I kept driving. At 2:58, my radio started cutting in and out. Not static, but something worse. Fragments of voices that didn't quite sound human. Words in languages I didn't recognize, all overlapping and distorted. The terrifying thought occurred to me that I was hearing transmissions from somewhere else, from some other layer of reality bleeding through. At 3:11 and 45 seconds, the radio died completely. The silence was absolute. I'd been listening to the radio for hours, hadn't even realized it until it was gone, and suddenly the cab of my truck felt impossibly small and incredibly lonely. My headlights seemed weaker, like they were struggling against something, pushing through resistance. At 3:12 exactly, I saw the figure on the side of the road. It was standing in my headlights, just off the shoulder, a person in what looked like old-fashioned clothing, the kind of thing people wore maybe 50 or 60 years ago. The figure was completely motionless, facing my direction, its face hidden in shadow. And the most unsettling thing was that it was just standing there, in the middle of the night, in the middle of nowhere, with no car, no reason to be anywhere near this road. I slowed down. Everything in my survival instincts screamed at me to speed up, to drive right past, but I was transfixed. The disturbing realization came to me that I'd seen this same figure in 3 different places now, always at the edge of my headlights, always in the same position, always watching. My truck coasted to a stop about 50 feet from the figure. That's when I noticed there were more of them. Other figures, standing along the roadside, maybe a quarter mile in both directions, all equally motionless, all facing toward the road. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, stretching back into the darkness until I couldn't see anymore. An impossible number of people, all standing alone, all absolutely still, all watching. The temperature inside my cab dropped so suddenly I gasped. My breath came out in clouds of vapor even though I had the heater running. The clock on my dashboard flicked to 3:13. I don't remember making the decision to drive. One moment I was stopped, staring at those impossible figures, and the next moment my truck was accelerating. I hit the gas hard, probably too hard, and the engine roared. In my mirror, I could see the figures turning, all of them, as if connected by invisible wires, all turning to watch me go. The next hour was a blur of panic and terrifying focus. I kept my foot down, kept my eyes fixed on the road, didn't look in the mirror, didn't look at the shoulder, didn't acknowledge anything except the necessity to get away from that place. When I finally pulled into a truck stop outside the Saskatchewan border, the clock said 4:12. 1 hour had passed. My logbook, which I filled out before I left, showed I'd been driving for exactly 38 minutes. I sat in that truck stop for a long time, hours. I drank coffee that tasted like nothing. I watched the sun come up over the prairie with a sense of overwhelming relief that I made it through, that I survived whatever that was. But the worst part came later, when I tried to make sense of what I'd seen, because I realized I couldn't quite remember the faces of those figures. I could remember their positions, their clothing, their stillness, but their faces were gone from my memory, erased or hidden behind some kind of psychological block. And I couldn't remember what my own thoughts had been. Those 45 minutes were partially gone, edited out of my mind like someone had cut them from a film. I never filed that run. Never reported what happened. Never told anyone except Dale, and he just nodded like he understood, like he experienced his own version of that missing time, that terrifying encounter with the impossible. Now, 6 weeks later, I am still driving, but I never go near Highway 6 anymore. Other drivers have started refusing that route too. The logs are piling up, the incident reports mounting, the creepy pattern continuing night after night as the winter deepens and the darkness gets longer. The RCMP and the highway authorities are calling it equipment malfunction. They talking about atmospheric conditions and truck driver fatigue and psychological stress from the long hours. But I know what it is. I know what is happening on that highway, even if I can quite articulate it, even if the memory slides away when I try to focus on it directly. Something collects people at 3:12 in the morning. Something that exists in the darkness, that wears human shapes, that can manipulate time and space and radio frequencies. Something that has been there for a very long time, and something that is still hungry, still watching, still waiting for the next convoy to pull over. The logs will keep showing the same pattern. 3:12 in the morning, radio silence, missing time, drivers too traumatized to talk about what they've seen. And somewhere on that highway, those figures are still standing, still waiting, still turning their hidden faces toward the road. I want to be driving that route again. And if you, a trucker, if you drive those northern highways, I'm asking you to please stay away from Highway 6 when the clock gets close to 3 in the morning. Because the road has learned how to hunt, and it knows exactly when to strike. Story 9. Ice crack at midnight. The town that heard a lake scream. The night the lake screamed, everyone in town heard it. Not everyone was awake, but everyone heard it. Something about that sound transcended sleep, bypassed the normal barriers of consciousness, and reached directly into the primitive part of the human brain that recognizes danger. The part that remembers when the world was darker and more hostile and filled with things that wanted to kill us. My name is Jennifer. I am a nurse at the regional hospital in a small Manitoba town I call Lakewood. The locals know it by its real name. I can't tell you exactly where it is, but I can tell you that we sit on the edge of Clearwater Lake, a body of water that has been frozen solid for 4 months every winter for the last 100 years. On the night of March 12th, at exactly midnight according to the official records, something happened that changed how everyone in this town understood fear. I was working a night shift. I'd been a nurse for 18 years, and I'd seen enough tragedy and pain that I thought nothing could truly disturb me anymore. I was in the emergency room, doing paperwork, when I felt it more than heard it. A vibration. A sensation that seemed to come from the ground itself. A tremor that made the windows rattle and the fluorescent lights flicker. For a moment, I thought it was an earthquake. We don't get earthquakes here. But I still thought maybe this was the moment. Then the sound came. It started low, beneath the range of normal hearing, something I could feel in my chest cavity rather than hear with my ears. Then it climbed. The frequency increased, and the volume increased, and it became this horrible, prolonged screaming sound. Not like any animal I'd ever heard, not like wind or machinery or anything that human ears were supposed to interpret. It was a sound that didn't belong to the natural world. A sound that suggested something massive and ancient and incomprehensibly large was tearing itself apart or being torn apart by forces beyond comprehension. The screaming lasted for maybe 30 seconds. But those 30 seconds felt like an eternity. Every person in the hospital froze. Patients in the beds stopped moving. Doctors and nurses stood motionless, their faces pale, their eyes wide. The sound was terrifying in a way that logic couldn't explain. It was just a noise. It was just vibrations in the air. But it triggered something primal and deep, a recognition that we were in the presence of something that didn't mean us well. Then it stopped. Silence crashed down like a physical force. For several minutes, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. We were all waiting for something else to happen, for some follow-up to that nightmare sound. But nothing came, just the normal sounds of a hospital at night. Monitors beeping, fluorescent lights humming, the wind outside pressing against the windows. The phone started ringing. In the emergency room, the phone started ringing, and it kept ringing. Call after call, people terrified, confused, asking if anyone else had heard that sound. Asking if something had happened. Asking if the lake was breaking up or if there was an earthquake or if they were losing their minds. By 2 in the morning, We had 17 people in the air, most of them complaining of cardiac symptoms from the shock and adrenaline surge triggered by the eerie screaming. None of them were seriously injured. They were just scared, deeply, profoundly scared. The next day, I looked at the municipal records. I wanted to understand what had happened. The town office had logged the incident as a possible ice-out event. That is bureaucratic language for the lake potentially breaking up early, which happens sometimes in spring when the ice destabilizes. But the records I saw didn't support that conclusion. The ice was still at a measured thickness of 3 feet. The water temperature was well below freezing. There should have been no reason for the ice to suddenly crack or break or produce any sound at all. I talked to people around town. Everyone had heard it. The librarian had heard it while she was reading at home. The high school principal had heard it from his house 3 miles away from the lake. The police chief had heard it during his rounds. Regardless of location, regardless of distance from Clearwater Lake, everyone reported the same thing. The screaming sound, the bone-deep terror it induced, the lingering sense of dread that followed it. But there was something else. People reported seeing things on the lake that night. A woman named Dorothy who lived on the shore came to my office at the hospital a few days later. She looked unsettled, haunted. She told me that on the night of the screaming, she looked out her window toward the lake and seen cracks spreading across the ice. Not from wind or normal ice expansion, but radiating outward from a single point in the center of the lake. She described them as moving, as if something beneath the ice was pushing upward with enough force to fracture the frozen surface from below. The creepy part was what Dorothy saw at the center of those cracks. A bulge in the ice. A dome-shaped protrusion, as if something massive was pushing up from underneath, trying to break through. She said the bulge was at least 40 feet across. She said the ice was straining, bending, looking like it might rupture at any second. But then, she said, everything just stopped. The bulge sank back down. The cracks slowly contracted, closing up like wounds sealing themselves. The ice settled, and the screaming sound faded away. When I checked the next morning, the ice looked completely intact. Smooth, undamaged, as if nothing had happened at all. I requested the satellite imagery from that night. It took a few weeks to get clearance, but when I finally saw it, the truth was undeniable. There was a massive disruption in the center of Clearwater Lake recorded on satellite at exactly midnight. Not a crack pattern, not a bulge, but an absence, a completely dark spot on the thermal imaging, which meant something down there was either radiating intense heat or absorbing heat in a way that didn't match normal water behavior. And around that central dark spot, there were radiating fracture patterns visible even from space. Something in that lake was big enough to show up on satellite imagery. Something capable of producing a sound powerful enough to terrify an entire town. Something that existed at a depth and in conditions where no known animal should be able to survive. I did research. I looked at historical records for the region, and I found something terrifying. In the municipal archives, there were reports going back 60 years of similar incidents. A screaming sound from the lake in the winter of 1962. Again in 1978. Again in 1991. Always in March. Always at night. Always described as horrifying and inexplicable. The reports were never connected because the town records were scattered, some stored digitally, some archived in boxes in the basement of the town office. But once I started looking, the pattern became obvious. Every 13 years, every March, every midnight, a sound like the lake itself was screaming, followed by reports of movement beneath the ice, followed by a return to total normalcy. I looked at the dates more carefully. 1962, 1978. That was 16 years, not 13. But then 1978 to 1991 is also 13 years. And 1991 to 2004 is 13 years. But there is no record of an incident in 2004. Unless it happened and wasn't documented. Unless people had forgotten or stopped reporting it or the municipal workers who might have recorded it had left town. The pattern is broken. The cycle was supposed to continue. But this year, March 12th at midnight, something returned after a gap of 21 years. Something that had been waiting beneath the ice, waiting for the temperature and conditions to be just right, waiting for the moment when the barriers between its world and ours became thin enough for it to communicate. The sound had changed too. The people who remembered the screaming from 1991 said it had been high-pitched, almost like a whale call, distorted and magnified. This time, the sound was lower, more guttural, and there was something in it that suggested intelligence. Purpose. The eerie impression of something that was trying to speak, trying to push a message or a warning through the medium of that horrifying noise. I've been having nightmares since that night. Dreams about being underwater in absolute darkness. About something massive moving through the water next to me. Dreams about that sound, that terrible screaming, getting louder and louder until I wake up gasping and covered in sweat. I also noticed something disturbing happening around town. 3 people who were particularly affected by the sound have left, just packed up and moved away without explanation. A woman who lived here for 40 years suddenly decided to relocate to the coast. A man who had been born and raised in this town drove away one morning and hasn't to come back. A family with children got in their cars and drove south, telling neighbors they couldn't stay here anymore. The psychological pressure of knowing something is in that lake, something ancient and powerful and capable of reaching out into our world with sound that transcends normal physics, is starting to fracture people. We're a small community. We know each other. We see each other at the grocery store, in the library, and the church. But now there is an unspoken tension, an awareness that we're all waiting for the next time midnight comes around and the lake screams again. Because it will scream again. I'm certain of that now. The cycle has restarted. 13 years from now, on some March night, they'll hear that sound again. And the next time, I am not confident that whatever is under that ice will just settle back down and wait another cycle. I think it's waking up. I think it's been dormant for decades, waiting beneath the frozen surface. And something about this year, something about the conditions or the temperature or the phase of the moon or something we done to understand triggered it. It came up. It tried to communicate. It tested the boundaries between its realm and ours. The unsettling truth is that the ice won to hold forever. Eventually, in late spring when the water warms up and the freeze-thaw cycles intensify, the ice will break. The lake will become liquid again. And when that happens, when the barriers between depths and surface fully collapse, I don't know what will emerge. I'm planning to leave before next March. I told my friends and colleagues that I'm going to pursue other opportunities, but the truth is I can't stay here anymore. I can't sit in this town waiting for midnight, waiting for the lake to scream again, waiting for whatever that is to finally decide that dormancy isn't enough anymore. If you live near a frozen lake, if you hear unexplained sounds in the middle of winter, if you see disruptions in the ice that don't to match natural phenomena, please understand what that means. It means something vast and terrifying has chosen that water as its home. It means you reliving on top of something that doesn't belong to the daylight world. The screaming sound we heard wasn't the lake breaking up. It was something trying to communicate, a chilling warning from the depths, a message that said, in every frequency and overtone and nightmarish echo, I'm awake. I am watching. I am coming. The horror of that night will stay with me forever. The fear hasn't faded. It's only grown deeper as I understand what really happened out there on Clearwater Lake at midnight on March 12th. Something enormous is down there. And someday soon, it will no longer be content to wait beneath the frozen surface. Story 10. Black Ice. A Manitoba winter road horror story. The headlights caught something moving across the highway ahead, and I knew right then that I wasn't going to make it home. It was 2 in the morning on Highway 10, somewhere between Winnipeg and Fishing Lake. The kind of darkness that doesn't exist anywhere else. Not the darkness of a city night or even a forest. This was the darkness of the Canadian prairie in February. Absolute, suffocating, empty. My truck, this heater, was struggling against the cold. Outside, the temperature had dropped to -35. The wind chill was something I tried not to think about. I made this drive 100 times. I was tired, sure, but not stupid. I had a full tank, good tires, and I knew these roads. That's what every person who dies on winter highways thinks before it happens. The shape I saw wasn't too deer. It moved wrong, too upright, too deliberate. I slowed down, squinting through the windshield. The snow was falling heavy now, the kind of blizzard that reduces visibility to maybe 50 feet. My wipers were fighting a losing battle. I could see the center line, barely, and the dark wall of prairie on both sides. Nothing else, just white static and the screaming of wind against the cab. The shape was gone. Probably just a trick of the headlights. Snow swirling in patterns that looked like movement. You heard about this. Driver hallucinations on long winter stretches. The isolation gets to you. Your brain starts filling in blanks that aren't there. I pressed on, gripping the wheel tighter than necessary. The road was pure ice beneath the fresh powder. I could feel the slight slickness, the way the truck wanted to drift if I accelerated too hard. I kept my speed steady at 60 kilometers per hour. Safe. Controlled. That's when the radio started cutting out. Not normal static. This was different. There were words underneath, but I couldn't make them out. Just fragments. A voice, distorted and wet sounding, like someone talking underwater or through a broken speaker. I reached forward and turned the dial. News station, then country, then AM talk radio. Every frequency was the same, that same underwater voice, saying something I couldn't quite understand. I switched the radio off. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. My phone had no signal. I checked it 5 minutes ago out of habit. Now I checked again. Nothing. Not even one bar. Out here in the winter. That was unusual. Cell towers were few and far between. But something about it felt wrong tonight. Like the road itself was swallowing signals. The headlights caught something else ahead. This time it was unmistakable. A vehicle, parked on the shoulder. A sedan, dark-colored, half buried in snow. No lights, no emergency flashers. Just sitting there on the side of the road like it had been abandoned. I knew what I should do. Keep driving. Call the RCMP when I got signal again. Tell them there was a vehicle out here. But the closer I got, the more unsettled I felt. There was something about the way it was positioned, perfectly centered on the shoulder, like someone had carefully parked it there. And the windows were coated in ice, thick enough that I couldn't see inside. I was passing it now. In my headlights, I could see the back bumper. No visible damage. The trunk was clean, pristine under the snow. But there was something on the back window. Writing. Maybe. Ice carved away in deliberate strokes. I was past it too quickly to read. I gripped the steering wheel and kept driving. My heart was going faster than it had any reason to. It was just an abandoned car. Happened all the time on winter highways. Someone had engine trouble, called for a tow, got picked up. By morning it would be gone. By morning, this whole drive would be nothing but a minor unsettling memory I'd forget within a week. Except the road ahead was narrower now. I hadn't noticed it happening. But the highway had changed. The shoulders had disappeared. The prairie on both sides seemed closer. The darkness pressing in. My headlights weren't reaching as far. The snow was falling thicker. A complete whiteout building. I eased off the accelerator. 50 kilometers per hour now. The wind was howling. A sound like something alive and angry. My truck was drifting slightly, and I could feel the ice under the tires. That sickening sensation of losing traction. I straightened the wheel, corrected. The truck wanted to slide left. In my peripheral vision, something moved. A figure, standing on the right shoulder. Completely still, watching the road. I didn't turn my head to look directly. Something in my gut was screaming at me not to. But in my peripheral vision, I could see it, a dark shape, human-sized, facing the road. Facing me. As my truck passed, I felt its attention shift, following me. My foot went harder on the accelerator. The truck responded, tires spinning slightly on the ice before finding purchase. I was doing 60 now. Too fast for these conditions. I knew that, but I couldn't slow down. That figure was still there in my mind, standing on the shoulder, watching, waiting. The highway opened up again. The shoulders returned. The snow started falling lighter. My breathing was coming in quick, shallow gasps. I was panicking, and I knew it. I forced myself to take deep breaths. In through my nose, out through my mouth. Re-driving. There is nothing to be afraid of. But there was something to be afraid of. The speedometer said I was doing 90 kilometers per hour now. Way too fast. I eased off the gas. 70. That felt safer. But it felt slower, like I wasn't getting away fast enough. The radio came back on by itself. I didn't touch it. I hadn't turned it back on. But there it was, that same distorted voice, that underwater sound. It was louder now, more insistent, like someone was desperately trying to communicate through a barrier I couldn't break through. I reached over to turn it off, my eyes still on the road, and that is when I saw the next vehicle. Another car. This one was in the middle of the road, not on the shoulder, in the middle of the lane. Stop, dead ahead, maybe 100 meters away. I hit the brakes hard. The truck started to slide. The ice grabbed the tires and the whole vehicle began to fishtail, the back swinging around. I was losing control. I could feel it happening. That sickening sensation of the vehicle doing something I didn't want it to do. The prairie spun in my headlights. The night sky, the road, the snow. I turned into the skid. Corrected. The truck straightened. I was sweating now, my hands shaking on the wheel. The vehicle in the road was gone. There was nothing ahead except empty highway and darkness. I pulled over to the shoulder. I was shaking too hard to drive. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. I sat there, engine running, heater blasting, trying to slow my heart rate. It had been a hallucination. Had to be. Driver fatigue, isolation, the psychological pressure of the darkness and cold and endless white. My brain was playing tricks, filling in threats that didn't exist. But the radio was still on. That underwater voice was still there, still trying to say something. Still buried under distortion and static. I reached over to turn it off again. The dial was already off. Had been off the whole time. My hand froze. I hadn't turned it off. I only thought about it. But the dial was off, and yet the voice was still coming from the speaker. No, I looked at the radio display. The digital numbers were cycling, station after station, clicking through automatically. Each one was the same. That voice. Urgent. Pleading. Impossible. I turned the key. The engine shut down. The voice stopped immediately. The silence was deafening. I sat in the dark with the wind screaming around the cab, and I tried to think of what to do. Call for help. That was the logical thing. Get out the phone. Drive slowly until I found a signal. Call 911. Or drive faster to get out of the dead zone. Get back to civilization. I turned the key again. The engine started. The heater came back on. The radio didn't automatically turn itself back on this time. Small mercies. I pulled back onto the road, moving slowly. 40 kilometers per hour. The speed felt impossibly slow, but it was the only pace that felt safe. Around me, the prairie was invisible except where my headlights touched. Beyond that, it was just emptiness. The kind of emptiness where people disappeared. The speedometer started climbing on its own. 50 kilometers per hour. 60. My foot wasn't moving. I wasn't accelerating. The truck was doing it somehow. I looked down at the pedal. It wasn't depressed. The cruise control wasn't on, but the truck was getting faster. 70 kilometers per hour now. Too fast for these conditions. Too fast to stop safely. I pressed down on the brake pedal. Nothing happened. The road ahead curved left. I tried to turn the wheel. It was stuck, locked in place. The truck was speeding up, following the curve of the road that I couldn't see. That didn't exist except in the brief flash of my headlights before the snow swallowed it again. 80 kilometers per hour now. The ice was underneath the tires. I could feel it. The truck was going to slide. In a moment, I was going to lose control, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. My hands were gripping the wheel, pulling, trying to turn, trying to do something. But it was like the truck had a mind of its own. 85 kilometers per hour. A shape emerged from the snow ahead. Another vehicle. This one was a truck, rolled over on its side, half buried in snow. The lights were still on, dim and strange colored, like emergency flares. As I got closer, I could see the door was open, and there was something on the ground next to it, something dark and shaped like a person. My truck wouldn't slow down. 90 kilometers per hour. The crash truck was directly ahead now. I was going to hit it. I was going to crash. I tried to turn the wheel again, but it was still locked. I tried the brake again. Nothing was working. The steering wheel, the pedals, the truck was moving on its own, and I was just a passenger screaming silently in the dark. Then everything stopped. The truck decelerated suddenly, like I slammed on the brakes, like the engine had died. In one moment, I was heading toward disaster. In the next moment, I was rolling to a stop maybe 10 meters from the overturned truck. The silence was absolute. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the steering wheel. My breath was coming in ragged gasps. My shirt was soaked with sweat despite the cold. I sat there, staring at the rolled over truck, at the dark shape on the ground that I didn't want to look at too closely. The radio came back on. This time, the voice was clear, crystal clear, a woman's voice. Terrified. Help, the voice said. Please, someone help me. It came from the vehicle ahead, from the crash truck. It was the same woman's voice from the radio, the one that had been distorted and underwater before. Now it was clear enough to understand, clear enough to haunt. Please, the voice said again. It's still out here. It's still watching. The headlights of the crash truck flickered. Once, twice, then they went out. In the sudden darkness, I could see something moving at the edge of my headlights. A shape, standing on the road, upright, watching. I didn't plan. My foot slammed down on the accelerator, and my truck lurched forward, speeding past the crashed vehicle, away from the shape, away from the voice, away from whatever this was. The road bent and twisted, and I followed it blindly, hoping it would lead somewhere. Somewhere warm, somewhere safe, somewhere that wasn't this stretch of infinite, haunting darkness. The snow was falling heavier again. The visibility dropped to almost nothing. I was doing 100 kilometers per hour now, way too fast, but I couldn't stop. Behind me, there was only the black void of the road I'd come from. Ahead, there was only the white wall of snow my headlights were cutting through. I drove that way for what felt like hours. Time had become strange, distorted. My eyes were burning from staring at the road. My hands were locked on the wheel. My breathing was ragged. Then, ahead, there was a light. A building. A truck stop. Concrete and yellow lights cutting through the darkness like a beacon. I'd never been so relieved to see civilization in my life. I was off the road, pulling into the parking lot, killing the engine. Inside, there were 3 other trucks. 1 person behind the counter. Normal things. Safe things. I sat at the counter with a coffee I didn't drink, trying to stop shaking, trying to think about what had just happened. The clerk asked me if I was okay. I told him I had a rough drive. He nodded like he understood, like he'd seen this before. Drivers coming in looking terrified, looking haunted. Bad stretch of road out there, he said. A lot of accidents, a lot of people who didn't make it. I asked him about the vehicles, about the crashed truck and the sedan. He looked at me with something like pity. What vehicles? He asked. I described them. The sedan with the writing on the window. The truck rolled over on its side. He shook his head. Nobody just called anything in. They hurt? We get notifications when there's accidents. He paused. You sure you were okay? I was sure I wasn't. But I didn't. Did you say that? I paid for the coffee and went back outside. My truck was sitting where I left it, covered in fresh snow. The windows were already freezing over again. Behind me, the highway disappeared into darkness. I got in the truck. I started the engine. I pulled back onto the road. And I drove. Slowly, carefully, without incident. By the time I reached Winnipeg, the sun was coming up. The highway behind me looked normal. Just pavement and snow and the ordinary danger of winter driving. No overturned trucks. No abandoned sedans. No figures standing on the shoulder. But I knew they were still out there, waiting on that stretch between Fishing Lake and Winnipeg. Waiting for the next person who drove through in the dark. Waiting for the next driver to get tired. Waiting for the next person to doubt their own mind. The road is still there. The darkness is still there. And on the bad nights, when the blizzards roll in and the temperature drops, I wonder if those vehicles are still waiting. If that voice is still calling for help. If whatever stands on that shoulder is still watching. I don't drive Highway 10 anymore. Some roads, once you've driven them, you realize they drive you. And some drives you don't to come back from the same. You come back changed. You come back knowing that out there in the Manitoba winter, on the roads between towns, something is waiting in the darkness. Something that's been waiting a long time. And it's still hungry. So now you've heard them. 10 stories from Manitoba's winter roads. 10 accounts of people who encountered something that violates every natural law. 10 cases where the evidence contradicts the official explanations. But remember what I promised at the beginning? The pattern that could save your life. Here it is. Listen carefully. Every single person who survived these encounters did one thing. They kept moving. The surveyor who found the footprints didn't stand in that circle. The trucker who saw the figures kept driving. The nurse who heard the lake scream didn't go out onto the ice. The moment you stop on these roads, the moment you investigate the impossible thing you were witnessing, you give it permission to claim you. This is the pattern. Manitoba's winter operates on a predatory logic. Curiosity equals vulnerability. The darkness, the cold, the isolation, they were not just environmental hazards. They were hunting conditions. And whatever uses these roads as its territory has learned exactly how to make people stop, make them doubt, make them step out of their vehicles into the killing cold. Here is my advice from years of research. If you were ever on a Manitoba highway in winter and something feels wrong, a figure on the shoulder, a vehicle that shouldn't be there, a sound that has no source, do not stop. Do not investigate. Keep your doors locked, maintain your speed, and get to the next town as fast as conditions allow. Your curiosity is not worth your life. Now, I told you 4 people are still missing. That is true. But what I didn't tell you is that their GPS data shows something impossible. All 4 devices recorded them driving in perfect circles for hours before the signal died. Circles on highways that are perfectly straight, as if the road itself had folded, trapping them in a loop they couldn't escape. If you haven't subscribed to Vesper Shroud, do it now. When we hit 100 subscribed, I am investigating one of these locations in person, with equipment, with cameras, and subscribers will vote on which story we investigate first. Don't miss your chance to be part of this. Destroy that like button if these stories gave you chills. Your engagement tells YouTube to show this to more people who need to hear these warnings. Drop a comment telling me which Manitoba story terrified you most, whether you ever drive these roads after dark. If you experienced something unexplainable on isolated highways, share this video with someone who drives winter roads. Warn them, because some of these patterns are still active, still claiming people, still waiting for the next driver who makes the fatal mistake of stopping. Before I let you go, I need to tell you something. My father disappeared on Highway 10 in 1998. His truck was found idling on the shoulder, doors locked from the inside, no sign of struggle. The official report said he abandoned the vehicle, but I found his journal. His final entry described seeing children in the snow and hearing a voice that sounded like my mother calling from somewhere impossible. I have spent 20 years investigating cases like his, and I learned that these roads don't take people randomly. They re-selective, they re-patient, and they re-still hunting. Some of you will drive these roads for work, for family, and when you encounter something that makes your instincts scream danger, you will remember these stories. You will remember the warnings. I am begging you to choose survival over curiosity, because Manitoba, this winter, is still hungry. The figures are still watching. The voices are still calling. And somewhere in that frozen darkness, something ancient is perfecting its ability to make people stop their vehicles and step out into the night. Stay safe out there. Stay moving. And most importantly, stay subscribed to Vesper Shroud. Remember, some roads are empty for a reason. Some stretches are avoided for a reason. And some stories are told as warnings, not entertainment. This is Vesper Shroud, reminding you that the darkest things don't hide in shadows. They wait on the shoulder of winter roads, watching for the next person curious enough to stop. And they are very, very patient.